synthetic material, if that makes sense. So, for example, there's a pesticide called rotenone that used to be organically allowable. And then Omri started doing more research, and they realized that it was, despite being derived from a flower and not very toxic, its toxicity was really persistent when it got into surface water of fish. So now Omri's put on the list of disallowed products. So you don't have to choose products from the Omri list to use. It's just sort of a guide. There are plenty of products that you can use that are not on the Omri list. So, for instance, you can use compost. It's not on the Omri list. There's plenty of products like that. So, in order to certify as organic, you have to follow those rules. You have to be certified. That's the technical USDA definition of organic. But it also makes other people. Like I was saying, there's in that solve problems. So, in an organic system, you're building an ecosystem that prevents insects from becoming pests, from populations exploding to the point of pest problems, and prevents pathogens from exploding to the point of disease. So there are bugs and there are pathogens all around us all the time. But until they actually start to dominate the scene, we don't call them diseases or pests. They're just other residents of the ecosystem. And the way that organic farmers do that is by building, like I said, a healthy ecosystem. The foundation of that ecosystem is all in the soil. So the organic farmer's job is really not so much to grow plants, although that's how they make a living. It's really about growing soil and increasing over time the health, biodiversity, and the structure of the soil. When you have healthy soil, you have healthy plants. When plants have easy access to water, air, nutrients, and a good place to grow their roots, and they have the right balance of minerals and nutrients, they grow strong and they can resist attacks by diseases and pests. Just like when we attack our body can resist it, produce antibodies to kill it. Whereas if we're weak, then it'll take hold and we'll get sick. Or if somebody comes and tries to mug us, we'll just fight them off. Whereas if we're weak, they'll kill us. Or the plants say, we're a plant. Yes. So, in growing healthy soil, we consider the health of our plants. And to do that, to build healthy soil, there are three main tools that we use. One is cover cropping, which you saw some questions about that in your questionnaire, crop rotation, and composting. Cover cropping, excuse me. Cover cropping is growing a crop in a place not to harvest for food, but to harvest as food for the soil. So instead of taking it off, you're tilling it back into the soil to be decomposed and for the soil to be used for its own food. So a really great example for cover cropping is clover. It's a really, really common cover crop among organic farmers. The reason why is because it's a legume. Like beans, clover, there are some other ones as well, but beans are a legume. And they have this great relationship with a certain kind of bacteria that actually lives inside of their roots, goes inside the bonds of their roots. And that bacteria is able to take nitrogen from the air and make its body with the nitrogen in the air. And when it dies, that nitrogen gets released into the soil. If you know anything about plant physiology, nitrogen is usually the limiting factor for plant growth. If you don't have enough nitrogen, the plant doesn't grow. That's why people put down fertilizers on fields because they need more nitrogen. So we can use clover because it has this symbiotic relationship with this bacteria. It's doing all that work of synthesizing nitrogen for us. So it takes all the nitrogen from the air, turns it into its body, and then we till in the clover, and the clover dies, and so does the bacteria. And all that good fertility is left in the soil for the next planting of crops to pick up and use to grow. Another example of I've never cover cropped with fava beans. Fava beans are pretty expensive seed, and I think that I would just sort of but people do cover crop with soybeans. They let it grow up and let it seed and then till it in. The soybeans are really vigorous. And not only do they fix nitrogen, that whole process that I explained earlier is called nitrogen fixation, or fixing nitrogen. So certain crops, leguminous crops, fix nitrogen. But soybeans also produce a lot of biomass. So a plant that we would grow to produce biomass would be grass. So there's a particular kind of grass called sorghum Sudan grass. We also use rye, but sorghum Sudan grass is the best example because it grows huge. It grows like 8 feet tall. Rye grows maybe 6 feet tall before it starts to flower and head up. And it's just fixing all this carbon, and it's just like a big, huge plant. So when a plant grows, what it's doing is it's photosynthesizing, which means that it's taking carbon from the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, and it's taking out the carbon and then expelling the oxygen. So that's, we'll talk about global warming and reducing carbon in the atmosphere, growing trees. That's what trees do. They're taking carbon from the atmosphere and building their bodies with that carbon. That's what all plants do. So what they're doing is they're taking in all this carbon, they're turning it into organic carbon, their bodies. And then we till that carbon in, and it decomposes in the soil. It was the thing that I was talking about that grows really huge is called sorghum Sudan grass, the cover crop that we use. So when the grasses grow up and we till them in, all that raw organic matter is broken down by bacteria and fungus in the soil. And over time, it becomes a stable form of organic matter called humus. And humus is the spongy stuff that soaks up water and soaks up nutrients in the soil. So it's usually made up of sand, clay, and humus, or sediment, organic matter, old organic matter from other places, called loam. So cover cropping is a really important way for us to build soil organic matter and build soil nutrition. And in a lot of ways, it also is really important for pest problems as well. You can use it to bring in beneficial insects and bring pests out as well. But I'll talk about that in a bit. Crop rotation is also a very, very important tool that organic farmers use in building a healthy ecosystem. Crop rotation would just be, say you had several different crops on your farm. Crop rotation would just be rotating them through so that, say you had 5 different crops that you grow, you just rotate them through so the one crop isn't being grown in the same spot, which takes up a certain amount of space, and you sort of rotate them through those spots. The reason why we rotate crops, certain crops demand certain nutrients in the soil, and if they continue to demand those specific nutrients in the soil every year, they're going to deplete those nutrients. So after a while, that soil won't be as rich in those minerals, those nutrients, and so they won't be able to get what they need. They'll be unhealthy. We start to notice really poor poor quality crops, and the pests will become a big issue because unhealthy crops are very easily taken advantage of by insects and disease pests.